Previously on Tran.
There were many things that JFK did that went completely and utterly against the military-industrial complex. He thought his #1 job as president would be to ensure that a nuclear war never happened. Before JFK was inaugurated, he had been briefed on a plan by the CIA to train Cuban exiles to invade Cuba, to take back their homeland. Little did he know that the CIA knew this invasion would fail, and that the CIA was betting on him to send in troops anyways once the invasion did fail to save face. Only after the invasion failed did JFK realize that he had been drawn into a CIA trap. JFK realized that if he wanted a chance at peace, he would have to wage a different kind of war against the very people in his own government. The CIA's #1 enemy was now the Commander-in-Chief, President John F. Kennedy. One of JFK's friends asked him what he thought of a best-selling novel at the time about a fictional military takeover in the United States.
"It's possible,"
he said,
"but it won't happen on my watch."
As the dust settled, JFK turned to one of his highest officials in his administration and said that he wanted to
splinter the CIA in 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds.
After firing the 3 most powerful men in the CIA, JFK then started cutting the CIA's budget, hoping to reach a 20% reduction by 1966. And from then on, instead of relying on the CIA for advice on foreign policy, he made the military Joint Chiefs of Staff his main advisors, because he foolishly believed that the military would be easier to control than the CIA. Oh boy, was he wrong. One of America's most important battlegrounds in the Cold War was Asia. At the time, the country Laos was being torn apart by a civil war between communist rebels backed by Vietnam and the pro-American governments. In other words, Laos was under the threat of falling to the commies. So guess what JFK's military generals advised? Military action, of course. Laos is a small landlocked country, they argued. It would be a piece of cake. All JFK would have to do was move a few thousand American troops into Laos and bomb a bunch of rebel hideouts. Simple, the military generals argued, but with the Bay of Pigs fresh in his mind, JFK was not about to fall for that trick again. A war in the remote jungles of Laos would be difficult to win, and escalation would be all too easy.
"You drop a bomb on Hanoi and you start using atomic weapons,"
Robert Kennedy remembered them replying. To JFK, it became crystal clear. Not only had the CIA gone mad, but also the military. It was obvious that if he wanted a real chance at world peace, he wouldn't just have to splinter the CIA, he would have to bring the military, quote, under strict control as well.
"This shit has got to stop,"
he told his press secretary. JFK had already painted himself as the #1 enemy to the world's most powerful intelligence agency, and now it was time to do the same to the world's most formidable military. And by the way guys, if you've ever thought about starting a YouTube channel, but you hesitated because you don't have a good camera, mic, or editing know-how, then you gotta know about this app called InVideo AI. InVideo AI is like ChatGPT but for videos. It allows you to create full-blown ready-to-publish videos using just text prompts, meaning that it will write the script for you, it will select the stock footage, and it will even record the voiceover for you. Check it out, they're the sponsor of today's video. First, you want to open up the InVideo AI interface and you want to type in your prompts. You want to be as detailed as possible, so don't say something like a YouTube short about cats. You want to say something like this. Create a YouTube short on the craziest facts about cats, make it funny, and use a female voiceover with a southern accent. Click generate, you can mess around with these settings and then click continue, and you get something like this.
Well, howdy there, folks. Ever wondered why your cat acts like they're the boss? That's cause in ancient Egypt, cats were worshipped like gods.
Not bad for a first draft where you didn't have to lift a finger. Now you can make edits to it with more text prompts, something like this. Change the voice over to a male British voice, and start the video with a joke about cats. Now let's take a listen.
All right, folks, here's a feline fun fact that's sure to make you smile. Why don't cats play poker in the jungle? Too many cheetahs. Now that we've set the mood, let's dive right in. Ever wondered why your cat struts around like own the place?
Pretty impressive. And what's cool is that you can also use InVideo AI for educational content, video essays, explainers. So if you're ready to start pumping out videos without making the videos yourself, scroll down and click the link below to sign up and try InVideo AI for free. You can make 4 videos for free on their free plan, but if you're serious, I recommend their $20 plan. This plan removes the watermark and it gives you access to millions of royalty-free stock footage clips. You also get a human-sounding voiceover and much more. So scroll down, click the link below and give it a try, and thanks to InVideo AI for sponsoring this video. On October 14, 1962, a U-2 spy plane carrying out surveillance over Cuba spotted something alarming. 8 medium-range nuclear missile sites were being built on the island. Cuba didn't have the skill or equipment to build these missile sites themselves, which meant only one thing. The Soviets were on America's doorstep. They were about to move nukes into Cuba. Behind closed doors, the CIA and military commanders must have been furious. If Kennedy had just bombed Cuba and sent in reinforcements when they asked him to the first time, none of this would have happened. Castro would have been gone, and so would the Soviets' chance of ever getting this close to America's shores. But now it was too late. Soviet nuclear warheads were probably on their way to Cuba as they spoke, if they weren't on the island already, so the CIA and military made the only logical recommendation they could. Completely destroy the missile sites, destroy Fidel Castro's Air Force too just for good measure, and if necessary, the military would obviously be on standby ready to invade the island soon after just to ensure the job was done. But just like JFK, Defense Secretary Robert McNamara wasn't so sure about this aggressive plan. Quote, the military chiefs responding to McNamara's question about whether that might lead to nuclear war, doubted the likelihood of a Soviet nuclear response to any US action, end quotes. That's right, if they attacked Cuba, the military chiefs doubted the Soviets would use nukes. So JFK was supposed to risk the future of the world based on his military chief's doubts, and there was no way he was going to play along. So instead, JFK went around his military chiefs altogether. Quote, Kennedy decided to impose a blockade of Cuba without consulting the military chiefs with any seriousness. He needed their support in case the blockade failed and military stops were required, but he was careful to hold them at arm's length. He simply did not trust their judgment, end quotes. And so on October 22nd, JFK addressed America.
This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere. But now further action is required, and it is underway, and these actions may only be the beginning. We will not prematurely or unnecessarily risk the course of worldwide nuclear war, in which even the fruits of victory would be ashes in our mouth. But neither will we shrink from that risk at any time it must be faced. Acting, therefore, in the defense of our own security and of the entire Western Hemisphere, and under the authority entrusted to me by the Constitution, as endorsed by the resolution of the Congress, I have directed that the following initial steps be taken immediately. First, to halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. All ships of any kind bound for Cuba, from whatever nation or port, where they're found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back. This quarantine will be extended, if needed, to other types of cargo and carriers. We are not at this time, however, denying the necessities of life, as the Soviets attempted to do in their Berlin blockade of 1948.
JFK's military chiefs were outraged. Hadn't he learned his lesson the year before? Was he really trying to talk the Soviets out of nuking America? The Soviets were barbarians. They were incapable of listening to reason. One of his generals even went so far to say that, quote, this blockade and political action is almost as bad as the appeasement of Hitler at Munich, end quotes, referring to the Munich Agreement signed by Britain, France, Germany, and Italy in 1938 before World War II. In this agreement, these countries gave Germany a large piece of land in exchange for Hitler's promise to not take any more. Obviously, it didn't work. And JFK's generals were convinced that his little blockade was about to go the same way. But what the generals didn't know was that JFK wasn't just sitting around doing nothing. From now on, he was going to do things his way. Military chiefs be damned. While the military fumed over JFK's refusal to bomb Cuba, the president decided to take things into his own hands. JFK secretly reached out to Nikita Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union, hoping to convince him to remove his weapons. No one in the CIA, military, or even the State Department knew about these letters, and neither did Khrushchev's people. In one secret letter, JFK wrote,
The one thing that has most concerned me has been the possibility that your government would not correctly understand the will and determination of the United States in any given situation, since I have not assumed that you or any other sane man would, in this nuclear age, deliberately plunge the world into war, which it is crystal clear no country could win, and which could only result in catastrophic consequences to the whole world, including the aggressor.
It was a plea to the Soviet leader, a warning that JFK's military generals were a little trigger-happy. In another letter, JFK wrote,
Whatever our differences, our collaboration to keep the peace is as urgent, if not more urgent, than our collaboration to win the last world war.
him and Khrushchev would go on to communicate almost exclusively through these secret letters. At first, Khrushchev refused to listen. He refused to negotiate or even consider removing his missiles from Cuba. But JFK wouldn't give up. He kept trying to make Khrushchev see reason, and eventually he did. On October 25th, 11 days into the Cuban Missile Crisis, Fidel Castro sent Khrushchev a letter pushing him to attack America first. It was now or never. Khrushchev was backed into a corner before it had been all talk. Now here was the Soviet Union on the edge of no return, and Khrushchev just couldn't go through with it. On that same day, Khrushchev reached out to JFK asking to work together to resolve the crisis. But while JFK and Khrushchev negotiated in the background, JFK's generals were getting more and more antsy. Was the president just gonna sit around waiting for the Soviets to attack? And then it happened. On October 27th, an American U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba and its pilot killed. It sent the military into overdrive. Couldn't that Kennedy see what was happening? The Soviets just took the first shot. It's time to attack.
There was the feeling that the noose was tightening on all of us, on Americans, on mankind, and that the bridges to escape were crumbling.
Robert F. Kennedy said. The drums of war were picking up pace, but once again, JFK refused. Instead of declaring war on Cuba and the Soviet Union, JFK met with his brother Robert F. Kennedy, and together they agreed that RFK would have an emergency meeting with the Soviet ambassador, Anatoly Dobrynin, to send the Soviets one final plea. According to Khrushchev's memoirs, Robert Kennedy told the Soviet ambassador that
the president is in a grave situation and he does not know how to get out of it. We are under very severe stress. In fact, we are under pressure from our military to use force against Cuba. We want to ask you, Mr. Dobrynin, to pass President Kennedy's message to Chairman Khrushchev through unofficial channels, even though the president himself is very much against starting a war over Cuba. An irreversible chain of events could occur against his will. That is why the president is appealing directly to Chairman Khrushchev for his help in liquidating this conflict. If the situation continues much longer, the president is not sure that the military will not overthrow him and seize power.
To Khrushchev, the message was clear. The Kennedys did not know how much longer they could hold out against their generals. So in Khrushchev's own words,
we sent the Americans a note saying that we agreed to remove our missiles and bombers on the condition that the president give us his assurance that there would be no invasion of Cuba by the forces of the United States or anybody else.
JFK agreed, and the crisis was averted. But that was just the official story. In secret, JFK had made a much bigger concession. JFK had promised that America would remove all its nuclear missiles from Turkey, which was right on the Soviet Union's border. But America wouldn't be able to do it right away to save face. Khrushchev agreed, and the US military generals were never filled in on any of this. If anyone has ever deserved the Nobel Peace Prize, it was Kennedy. Too bad that 13 months later, he would be dead. Later on, it would become clear in the eyes of the Soviets that the Soviets probably felt that they had no choice but to shoot down the U-2 spy plane. In the book The Limits of Safety, political scientist Scott Sagan talks about how just 3 days before the U-2 was shot down, the US armed 30 ICBM test missiles off the coast of California. At the time, the US was in DEFCON 2, meaning that the US was actively ready for full-on nuclear war in less than 6 hours. Then the day before the U-2 was shot down, the US launched an unarmed ICBM test missile off that coast in California destined for the Marshall Islands. The Soviets could have easily mistaken this for the start of an attack, and at the bare minimum, a dangerous provocation. But the one good thing that came out of the Cuban Missile Crisis was that JFK got the chance to talk to Khrushchev man to man, world leader to world leader. And as it turns out, the two leaders had a lot more in common than they thought. Even though the crisis was over, their secret letters to each other didn't stop. In July 1993, 21 of these letters were declassified, and what they contained may surprise you. Over and over again, both JFK and Khrushchev agreed that the Soviet Union and America needed a fresh start. Neither of them really wanted another war. In one of the letters, Khrushchev wrote,
yes, the Soviet Union and the United States of America must live in peace with each other. They must build their relations on the basis of reason, of due regard for the real situation, and of mutual respect on the basis of the establishing of the principle of peaceful coexistence between states with different social systems in international affairs. This is the only right and sound basis for cooperation and securing of a lasting and stable peace. It is my most ardent desire that it would not remain only a dream and not become a mirage that creates nothing but false hopes.
Both these world leaders wanted peace, but both these world leaders were surrounded by a war-hungry military. 6 months after the Cuban Missile Crisis, JFK made good on his promises and removed America's missiles in Turkey. And when the military realized that JFK had blindsided them with all of this, they were officially out for blood. In their eyes, this young, naive president had gone rogue. He ignored everything they said, and it nearly cost them everything. Harkening back to JFK's prediction of a military coup, it was in this moment that the military leaders probably thought to themselves,
if we don't do something about this Kennedy, there is not going to be an America left to save.
JFK had just had his second Bay of Pigs.
These brass hats have one great advantage in their favor. If we listen to them and do what they want us to do, none of us will be alive later to tell them that they were wrong.
If JFK didn't know he was alone, he sure as hell did by now. By making enemies of both the CIA and military, he knew he was on thin ice, and so he isolated himself. He shut out all his advisors, both political and military, and from then on he would only confide in his brother, Robert Kennedy. But JFK still had to talk to his advisors, he still had to have meetings with them to, keep appearances, so he did. But to protect himself and to keep the record straight, he asked his Secret Service agent Robert Bauch to bug the White House. Yes, bug it. Install hidden microphones. So the Secret Service agent followed his orders and installed the White House's first practical taping system. Microphones were hidden in the Oval Office and in the Cabinet Room, with hidden switches all around so JFK could subtly turn them on and off. And from then on, in nearly every meeting JFK had with his advisors, he would put on a smile and secretly press record. In the end, there were 248 hours of recordings in total, including more than 20 hours during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And these secret recordings revealed just how little his own advisors thought of him. In one meeting in which JFK refused his general's recommendations for a quick and powerful attack on Cuba, the moment JFK walked out of the room, the general started trash-talking him. "Quote, you pulled the rug right out from under him," one said, as the other officials in the room argued over how they were going to get him to do what they wanted. In another meeting where a General LeMay was really pushing for an attack on the Soviets in Cuba, where he was really reassuring JFK that the Soviets wouldn't attack back, JFK would later recount this conversation with his aides saying,
Can you imagine LeMay saying a thing like that? These brass hats have one great advantage in their favor. If we listen to them and do what they want us to do, none of us will be alive later to tell them that they were wrong.
With these tapes, JFK hoped that he could finally learn enough to finally reel in the military and CIA again. But little did he know that his third Bay of Pigs was right around the corner. And this time, it wasn't the Soviets or the Cubans' fault. This time, JFK brought it all on himself.